And you mentioned it a little bit before. Some attorneys are better than others in these cases. I mean, I was on a case where the attorney knew what the child wanted based upon what I noted in my report to the court, which is a little distressing, but
Well, and
nonetheless.
What I want attorneys to know is that our research around volunteer guardians ad litem suggests that having a volunteer GAL on the case improves representation of children in our cases. And it does that because the reality is that the workload of our attorneys is beyond reasonable often. It is very difficult to get to know your clients especially well and be in constant communication with them and work with them behind the scenes to advise them in a way that their best interests are going to be protected. It's very difficult to do that. And so I have seen in numerous cases volunteers assist attorneys in keeping them in the loop, funneling information to them so they can represent their clients more effectively. I think we can work together on these cases.
That's truly what it's all about. You've been watching Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. My name is Tim Lynch. Our guest here is Charles Lerner of Boston CASA. If you have a question, please feel free to call in. Our number here is 617-708-3290. Let me change gears a little bit because I started at the beginning talking about the protocols.
Yep.
And we've had some shows on this, and a little distressing that there weren't protocols to begin with, and we were fortunate enough to have somebody like you at Boston CASA who developed protocols for communicating with LGBTQ youth. First of all, what kind of protocols are we talking about when we first explain that, and then go into what's the purpose?
Right. So, a lot of these were developed when I was working in California. I ran one of the only LGBT foster care programs in the country, and the spirit of the program was to find permanent families for LGBTQ youth, because we realized that the traditional ways of finding families for this particular vulnerable population, within a vulnerable population, some of the traditional ways that we typically recruited for families isn't always going to work for these youth. And I say a vulnerable population within a vulnerable population because, this is a group of foster youth. As we know, the outcomes of foster youth, especially the longer they spend in the system, are just really poor. If you look at educational outcomes for children who, the longer they spend in foster care, the worse educational outcomes they have. And if they age out of the foster care system, it's remarkably concerning about how few of them will go to college and graduate college. But even within that vulnerable population, you have this population who is even more at risk for poorer outcomes: homelessness, mental illness, substance abuse and addiction, experiencing violence, partner violence, et cetera. So, one of the places that I went when I was in California doing this work was I really reached out to attorneys and social workers and folks working with this population. I said, can we at least start from really, I was dramatic, and I said, this is a group of kids who are killing themselves at an alarming rate. Are you concerned about that? First of all, if you're not concerned about that, you shouldn't be doing this work at all. I will take that stand and say, you have to meet people where they're at around these issues, but if you're not concerned about that, then we have a problem. And if you are concerned about that, how are you going to be part of that, of the solution? I found that it was really not a waste of time, but we were really kind of wasting too much time philosophically debating the issue of identity and homosexuality and whether it was moral or whether it wasn't. That was just a waste of time, because meanwhile we're having that debate and kids are killing themselves and they're at risk. And so I think the starting point was that these youth need to know that the folks, when they're in a very vulnerable position, that are representing them and supporting them, are allies, are going to be safe. And how do you project safety? How do you project that you're an ally? And so protocols are really around, partly around, at least the protocols I've been part of developing. It starts from the premise that, for folks that are listening, being an ally is overt. It's not just in your value base. It's about it takes action, right?
Yeah.
So it's allied behavior. It's what are you doing to send the message that you're going to be affirming, non-judgmental, and supportive. And so in San Francisco County, one of the counties I was working in, we had a program through the agency I was working in, contracted by the county. At that time it was called Pride and Joy, out of Oakland, San Francisco. And we had posters, which had a woman holding up a picture of her foster son with his boyfriend going to the prom, right? And we had a lot of difficulty getting those posters for social work, the social workers to put those posters up in the office for various reasons. We also had little flyers, and we were debating this issue of morality. And I said, how do your kids know
That they could be accepted.
that they're going to be accepted? One way they know, and this is the same thing when we look at children, children from different racial backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds, levels of ability, et cetera, they need to see themselves reflected somewhere. And the more they see themselves reflected, the more they are affirmed for who they are. And so we were telling social workers, if you ask a youth who's 13, are you gay? Because if you're gay, I have some resources for you.
Yeah, it's not
What's going to
gonna
happen, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to work.
It's not going to work. But if you take these brochures and you put them somewhere somewhat visible on your desk, in your car, it sends a message that it's okay. Or if you're an intake worker and you're working with a youth, you just give the brochure to every single youth and you say, this may or may not apply to you, but here are some resources that are available to you if you need them. So there are things that you can do
You're not putting the kid on the spot.
Right.
You're letting the kid know that it's safe, it's an affirming environment, and you need to do that to communicate resources that could potentially save the kid's life.
Because they're not going to ask for them.
Correct.
They're not going to say to their social worker, hey, by the way, I think I may be gay.
Yeah.
What's available to me? And the other thing as well is the issue of language and the language you use and the questions you ask your youth. And sometimes, as being a social worker myself by training, there are times where you say to a teenage boy, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have are you taking a girl to a prom? What girl are you taking to the prom? Or like even some things simple as that. If you're a gay youth, being asked that question, and some folks will be very resistant. So now I have to say, do you have a partner? Are you dating anybody? Like I have to use this abstract language. I have to work around like these, this language and say it the right way. And what I say to people like that is the language you use is important because it can be very alienating. Because if you're a gay youth and I ask you, if you're a male, if I ask you, so what girl are you taking to the prom?
You're making assumptions that can
be
not be very affirming, to say, which is the purpose of protocols. So one of the other issues, and we have to wrap up here, but I'd like to finish off on the issue, is the kids age out of the system.
Right.
And certainly they need to know how to manage living skills. They're going to be paying rent, they're going to be managing a job and things like that. And certainly this is something CASA deals with.
Sure.
The volunteer gets involved and makes sure there's resources available. The kid understands that, they need to get a job and start supporting themselves and earning a living, which is tough because most kids live well into their 20s with their parents. These kids don't.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the thing that we do perhaps wrong, if that's for lack of a better way of putting it, in this system is, again, thinking about how the system is designed in a sort of unreasonable way or, insensible way, if that's a word. You learn those skills over time.
Yeah.
You learn them through relationships. You learn them through being able to, make mistakes and have somebody sit down with you and explain to you what mistake you made. You learn by having someone sit down with you and help you fill out, your tax return for the first time or your FAFSA for the first time. That's where you learn those things. Independent living skills classes are an important component of our aging out youth, but this is why I work for CASA and why I think more of these youth need to be appointed volunteers. And here at Boston CASA, we ask for those volunteers, especially for aging out youth, to stay involved after emancipation, because we know they're going to need somebody to turn to, and they very well may not have that person. So I think what happens with our youth is that they get those classes, they maybe have a case manager that they're able to talk to periodically, but they need more involvement.
They need
that.
continuity.
They need
And somebody
continuity.
who's affirming and they can trust.
That they can call at any time. They can call at 9 o'clock, and that isn't going to take a vacation for 2 weeks and be inaccessible when they're gone, right?
That's the purpose of Boston CASA. Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You've been watching Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. We're brought to you live the third Wednesday of every month at 4 o'clock. Thank you very much for tuning in. See you on the next episode.